before the program begins. So can we please have our distinguished guests begin to make their way up to the stage? For everyone else, if you have a cell phone, now is a great time to turn it out. Take it out, turn it off. We'll see how many more of those I get before the end of the day. Also, I just want everyone to know we are being carried live on C-SPAN. So again, mute your phones. Don't do anything too embarrassing, but you're good. You're going to be fine. We are going to be taking audience questions today. If you have a question you'd like me to ask our guests, please email headliners@press.org. You'll also find cards in the center of your table. So if you want, you can write a question on those, and then you can pass it to Cecily, who will be going around the room. Cecily will get them up to us. I cannot say what I cannot read. So as someone who is notoriously bad at handwriting, all I would ask is that you do your best to make it legible, and we will very much appreciate it. We'll ask as many questions as time permits. And again, looking forward to getting started here in just a minute. But if we can have our Nobel Prize laureates come up to the stage and join me here. And I think we're going to have Shireen we're just waiting on her, and she'll be here in a second, but we can get started. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. You're welcome.
The highly technical sticky notes. Okay, great. Cool. All right. We're all getting comfy. I know Shireen's going to join us up here in just a second. And she can take her time, no rush, but I will go ahead and begin. Well, good afternoon. Welcome to the National Press Club, the place where news happens. My name is Emily Wilkins. I have the honor of being the 117th president of the National Press Club, and I'm also a congressional correspondent for CNBC. Thank you so much for...
Give her the clap.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, those in the room as well as those who are joining us online and on C-SPAN for our Headliners event with 5 absolutely incredible women. Nobel Peace Prize laureates, Alexandra Matvichuk. I practiced, I promise. Lima Gobi. Sequala Carmen. Tawakkul Carmen.
Yes.
Shireen Abadi and Jody Williams. Getting these 5 women in the same room at the same time is almost a miracle. They are from all corners of the globe, and they give their time to make the world a better place. We know that women are vital to attaining and maintaining peace around the world, yet their voices and their stories often get lost in the tumult of conflict, war, famine, and displacement. The shocking news last week that Rebecca Cheptegei, a Ugandan long-distance runner who competed in the Paris Olympics, died after an ex-partner set her on fire only underscores the task and urgency around the world. Our job as journalists is to ensure that these stories get told, and today we are honored to give these extraordinary women, these voices of change, a platform to be heard. Today, we are joined by, I think we're going to start with Shireen Abadi, a co-founder of the Nobel Women's Initiative, who was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2003 for her work protecting the rights of women, children, and political prisoners in Iran. Ms. Abadi was one of the first women to become a presiding judge in Iran before she was stripped of her position after the Islamic Revolution in 1979. She later opened a legal practice to take up the cases of political dissidents. Alexandra Matvichuk, a human rights lawyer who was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2022 for her efforts to document war crimes, human rights abuses, and the abuse of power in her role as chair of the Center of Civil Liberties in Ukraine. After Russia's invasion of Ukraine, she also co-founded the Tribunal for Putin to document international crimes in all regions of Ukraine. Tawakkul Carmen, did I get it?
Yes.
All right. A journalist who played a significant role in sparking the nonviolent struggle for women's rights and democracy in Yemen by first reporting on injustices then in It says 2,000. I assume that there is supposed to be a date.
Yeah.
200.
Yeah.
Mobilizing in weekly protest in Yemen's capital to demand an end to government repression and corruption. Those protests ultimately blossomed into the Arab Spring in 2011, the same year Tawakkol was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Jody Williams, a co-founder of the Nobel Women's Initiative, who was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1997 for her work to ban landmines throughout the international campaign to ban landmines. From 1991 on, Ms. Williams' work was a driving force in the growth of the campaign from 2 organizations to over 1,300 globally, eventually leading to the international treaty banning anti-personal landmines. And last but absolutely not least, Laima Bowie, who was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2011 for her role in leading a nonviolent movement called Women of Liberia Mass Action for Peace. The movement played a critical role in leading Liberia's second civil war in 2003 and laid the path for the election of Africa's first female head of state, Eileen Johnson Sirleaf. We are excited to talk about the critical role of women who are fighting for peace and democracy with these 5 women who exemplify that and more. Please join me again in welcoming our Nobel laureates, Alexandra Matvichuk, Laima Bowie, Takwala Carmen, Serene Abadi, and Jody Williams to the National Press Club. So I will say, most of these questions, we can have anyone on the stage answer, so happy to have this in a conversational format. So if I throw it to one person and someone else wants to take the ball and run with it, I think that would be absolutely fantastic. And I want to begin with peace negotiations and a question on those, because research shows that countries with gender equity are more likely to resolve conflict without violence. Yet we often see all-male teams negotiating terms of peace. I want to see, maybe Takwala, I'll start with you because you're right here. Can you talk a little bit about why that might be?
The peace negotiation?
Yeah, why don't we see more women in the room when it comes to peace negotiations?
Because they don't want really peace to be achieved. They want fake peace because they don't know what is the real meaning of sustainable peace. There is no peace without the engagement of women in the peacemaking itself process, and also before the peacemaking itself on the whole field of the life. I always talking about what is the kind of peace that we want. It is not just, or what it is not, when we call what is the peace, it is not just the absence of war, but it's also the absence of injustice. So injustice including also the discrimination against women. So this is why we didn't see a lot of women in the policy maker positions. This is why we see a lot of marginalized women everywhere. This is why we see the voices of women who are in the battle for against dictatorship, in the fighting terrorism, in the fighting corruption, in the fighting tyranny. It is absence. It is not heard enough. So if we want to make women to be in the real peace negotiation, we have to make this table fair enough to include the real women in the battle, not women to be as a decor in this place. So not putting women in this place as a decor.
Excuse me. In the wars in the 1980s in Central America, I worked primarily Salvador, but also Nicaragua and Honduras. And when negotiations finally came about for El Salvador, of course, there weren't women, except for perhaps one and she was there because she was the commander in the FMLN. The FMLN were the revolutionary forces in Salvador. And in that negotiation for peace, all they did, it's not unimportant, but they focused on, separating the fighters, disarming the FMLN, and then I think it was like the last 5 or 10 pages of the negotiations said, and once this is done, we'll take a look at these, socioeconomic problems that cause this war. I believe they don't want women in the conversation because they want to focus on those things. And as my sister Tawakkol said, if you don't include the voices of everyone or representatives of those voices, how can you move to sustainable peace with equality and justice for all? Tough.
And Shireen, I know that you're one of the founders for the Women's Nobel Laureate Initiative. Can you talk a little bit about founding this group and what you hope to achieve with it?
وقتی که ظلم رو میخوان شروع بکنن، اول از همه از زنان شروع میکنن و اگر بقیه افراد و مردها ساکت باشن، اون موقع به تدریج ظلم به اونها هم سرایت میکنه، برای اینکه ظلم مصریه.
Oppression is always started against women. When they want to start oppressing a society, they start with women. But then later, men are oppressed as well, because oppression is contagious.
و این اتفاقی بود که در انقلاب 1979 در ایران افتاد. همون موقع تا انقلاب پیروز شد، یه مدت کوتاهی، مثلا شاید 40 روز هم نشده بود، گفتن که زنها بایستی روسری سرشون کنن اگر که میخوان در ادارات دولتی کار کنن، و البته زنها مخالف بودن و به شدت مقاومت میکردن.
So this happened in Iran when the 1979 revolution occurred. It was about maybe 40 days after the revolutionaries had won that the government came up with this idea that women have to cover themselves, cover their hair. And of course, women fought against that. They didn't want to accept it, but then the regulations were that if women wanted to keep their positions in the government, they had to wear the scarf.
مردا اون موقع میگفتن خب چیز مهمی نیست و از ما حمایت نکردن، برای اینکه فکر میکردن این فقط یه مسئله کوچکی است مربوط به زنها. میگفتن خیلی خب حالا قبول کنید، چه اشکالی داره.
However, men did not support us at that time. What they said was that it's not a big deal, it's just a scarf. Well, I'll go ahead and tolerate it. It's not a big deal. And
و مدتی کوتاه بعدش فهمیدن که چه اشتباهی کردن، برای اینکه سراغ مردها هم رفتن و حقوق شهروندی همه رو گرفتن، از جمله آزادی بیان، از جمله آزادی اجتماعات، همه اینا رو مردها هم از دست دادن.
But then not a few, I would say days or weeks after that was that men lost their rights too. After that, the freedom of speech was restricted, freedom of association was restricted, and other citizens' rights were restricted.
و به تدریج مردها هم طرفدار جنبش فمینیستی شدن تا حدی که در سپتامبر 2020 وقتی که یک زن به خاطر اینکه قسمتی از موی سرش بیرون بود به دست مامورین حکومتی کشته شد و زنها آمدن به خیابون و جنبش زن زندگی آزادی رو شروع کردند، مردها هم پا به پای زنها آمدن و مبارزه کردند.
But gradually men caught up to the extent that when in 2022 a young girl was killed for a part of her hair just showing on the streets in Iran, men joined women and joined the movement for women's life and freedom.
و یک جنبش خیلی عظیمی در بیش از 70 شهر ایران شروع شد که شما صداش رو در همه جای دنیا شنیدید و زنهای دنیا موهای سرشون رو می‌بریدن به علامت همکاری و همدردی با مردم ایران.
And I'm sure that everyone has watched those programs. The movement took to 70 or more little cities in Iran, big and little cities in Iran, and it was shown all over the world. What happened was that many women all over the world would cut their hair in order to show solidarity with Iranian women.
حکومت به شدت این جنبش رو سرکوب کرد ولی کن خاموش نشد و مردم هنوز هم به بهانه‌های مختلف معترضن و روز یک شنبه یعنی چند روز دیگه 15 سپتامبر سال روز دومین مراسمه و در ایران همه اعلام اعتصاب کردن و میخوان مجدداً یک بار دیگه خشم خودشون رو علیه حکومتی که همه چیز رو زیر پا گذاشته به حقوق شهروندی توجه نمیکنه نشون بدن.
And on September 15th, which is Sunday, is the second anniversary of the murder of Mahsa. The people of Iran have all decided to go on strike and to show their solidarity and also to continue the movement, proving and going against the government, which has taken all of their rights as citizens.
و حالا مردها هم فهمیدن که اگر جنبش فمینیستی در ایران پیروز بشه دموکراسی به ایران میاد. در حقیقت دموکراسی از دروازه حقوق زن وارد هر کشوری میشه.
And now the men have found out that if feminism wins in Iran, democracy will go to Iran. What they have understood is that democracy will go through the gates of women's rights to Iran.
That's such a powerful point, how much that is connected in terms of women and the overall democracy. Lema, I wanted to bring you into the conversation. The United Nations Security Council, they actually passed a resolution about 25 years ago that did call for women, on women, peace, and security, having full representative of women in all peace and security efforts. In the last 25 years, what kind of progress have we seen when it comes to women being involved?
Well, thank you. Sometimes I want to be pessimistic, but I also...
We're a bunch of journalists, so you can totally do that here.
Girl, you don't even want me to start. You will shut down your press club by tomorrow. But I also believe that if you're from a region, the region that I'm from, you have to keep optimism alive. And 1325, when it was passed, was a real joyous moment for us women, especially for those of us who were still living through conflict in our regions. But then we recognized that from the get-go, it was just a resolution. So it's almost like you take a bulldog, put it in your yard, but this bulldog has no teeth. And over the last few years, what we've come to recognize is that we've tried as women at the community level to keep 1325 alive, but unfortunately, peace work is not, as we say in Liberia, rice and beans. Peace work is expensive. Peace work is hard work. And when people begin to even imagine, and that question you asked Tawako that about why women are not at peace tables is because war equals militarism, and unfortunately the world we live in see peace as equal militarism, and all of them, if you put them in one bracket, is patriarchy. And so women have no place in any of these things. So when you're talking war and you're talking peace processes with men, you're talking trillions of dollars. When you're talking peace with women, you're talking droplets in a bucket. Like the dregs of the funding comes to women. So what 1325 did for all of us was to give us hope. But what it's not doing is to give us the funding, the necessary push that we need to do the peace work, even from the level of the UN. We're still seeing them call for peace processes minus women. So if you are the author and the architect of a particular thing that is supposed to be the empowerment tool for women, and you continue to leave them out, who else is going to take it? And I say a lot of the great nations, quote unquote, and I put great in quotes because I don't see any nation that is great anymore. A lot of those nations that people take cue from have failed, to do some of the things that they do. We're still in the corridors of Peace Hall. And there are data to show. I tell people that Liberia is the best example of women involvement in peace building we've celebrated 21 years of stability since the end of the war, and it is at this point that you clap for us. We've gone through 4 circles of elections, and the women who were a part of the peace process continue to ensure that peace, and they're taking it from 1325. And so throwing 1325 away is like throwing the baby out with the bath bucket. We need 1325. We need 1325 to continue to mobilize women's movement across the globe, in countries, between countries, amongst countries, but we also need 1325 to have the teeth that it needs to do the work that needs to be done. Look across the world. See the state of the world that we find ourselves in, from Israel, Palestine, Syria, and the more conflict we see happening, the less people are paying attention to other wars.
Is there a way to give 1325 more teeth?
Well, you see, that's where the optimism comes in. At the community level, at the local level, women have figured out that we can no longer wait for people to give 1325 the teeth that it needs. So in our communities, we're giving it the teeth, we're stepping out, we're doing stuff. And where the gap is where these local efforts meets national efforts and meets international effort. And for the last 25 years, this is what we've been talking. You need to recognize that at the grassroots level, all of the work that these women do is equivalent to anything that any man will sit in any peace room and talk about. It's not that they're smart. No. Sometimes you sit with the facilitators that they have in these rooms to say they're talking peace, and you are amazed of the stupidity that comes out of their mouth. But again, we continue to see, we can't find the women. Anne-Marie and I have been doing this work forever. I'm getting old, and we're still hearing that same thing of we can't find the women. Meanwhile, since 1325 is about participation, prevention, and protection, at the local level, people are figuring out how to do this. I'll give this example and shut up. In different communities, we work with Women My Foundation, and what we've done, we set up different groups we call peace brigades. And over time, we got a grant from the UN that they said, we need you to get these women to go around and do awareness campaign about sexual violence and abuse in their community. So we went there with our grand idea, and the women said, no. These are people that are not literate. What we want is to make farm. What we want is rice machine. What we want is cassava machine. So we listened to them. When they sent the evaluator from the UN, and he came, he was upset with us that they gave us money to do awareness on sexual violence. And these women who had not been to school schooled them. Say, sit down. Every time a rape happens in our community, we can't prosecute because we do not have money. Every time a rape happens to a child in our community, we leave it to divine justice because we don't have the funds to send these girls to the hospital and get doctor report. We cannot buy petrol for the police to go and arrest the perpetrators, and we can't retain a lawyer to push our case. With the rice machine, this is the amount of money we have in our bank account. Over the last 6 months, we've seen a decline in rape and abuse because it's no longer happening again because we have the teeth. That is how you give 1325, the teeth it needs to do what is right. But these are happening across movements. And this is the time for us to support women movement from grassroots to national to regional and international level.
Yeah. I want to answer.
I know someone's waiting on me to call on them, but I know several people have things they want to say now, so I'm just going to let you all go for it.
Yeah, I want to add something, and I like your question, but I know that you want to ask Alexandra a question. Then I will answer the question: how can we give teeth to 1325 resolution. I think it's a very important question. So
Okay.
I don't know if you allow me now or you will ask me.
Please do.
Yeah. So it's very important. In addition to what my sister Lima said, look, we have a very big problem that the United Nations itself doesn't have teeth. The United Nations itself, now all the collapsing, all the chaos is in the world. One of the main reasons is now this is international body is very weak. And the Security Council itself doesn't do its work to protect people around the world, to protect the agreements that is been signed between the countries inside the UN, including the 1325 resolution. So where is the resolutions of the United Nations in general? Now, talking about 1325, it talks about participation, prevention, and protection. And we don't see that it is provided for every woman around the world. And not just the human being itself is collapsed around the world now. So, for example, women, I'm from Yemen. And what we did in Yemen as a woman did a great work through our peace building process, which started with standing against the dictators. Because peace building process, it is not just the table. It is not putting women in the table, making dialogue and making some resolutions or peace agreements. It's began with first line, standing against injustice, and this is what we did in Yemen, as an example. We did a great work against the dictator himself. We pushed him to resign, and after he resigned, we did a great national dialogue with the great constitution dialogue, and we produced a very great draft of the constitution, and suddenly everything collapsed with the occupation with the coup led by Houthi militia supported by Iran, and with the war waged by Saudi and Emirates. And behind all these two powers, Iran from one side, Saudi Emirates from side, there is an international community that supports them. Western governments supported them. Supported this, this proxy war. And this collapsed and attacked our work. So, and this is because of those countries doesn't rely or doesn't do doesn't follow the values and the principles, just their interests. And this is what we see in the Security Council with the five, rights for the vetoes. So if we want 1325 to be implemented, we have to make reforms in the Security Council to stop these vetoes that give just 5 countries the absolutely rights to collapse depending on people. This is what we want. So we need a real reforms in the United Nations to give this body unbinding, strategy to bind those countries to stop any kind of atrocities against their people, to implement the resolutions and the treaties that they said. Now we see in Palestine and Israel war. What is happening? 40,000 people being killed under this atrocity. Most of them are women and children, and there is no real, work or international binding commitment to stop this kind of genocide. The same thing we witnessed before in Syria. We witnessed with the Rohingya people, and so there is no real. This is what when I started my answer. There is no real international commitment or willing to stop
once Alexandra speak, I will come back and just give one point, but we'll let her speak because
it's an all-female panel because the panelists actually care about hearing from everyone.
Yes.
This does not always happen.
Yes. We want Alexandra.
And then also, this is her first meeting with NWI. We don't want her to resign after this. We're trying to be good girls.
We will say we saved the best for last. Although I think everyone up here is stiff competition. But Alexandra, I did want to ask you specifically about everything that is happening in Ukraine. Amnesty International called the war in Ukraine a crisis for women and girls. They detailed trafficking, sexual violence, really a heartbreaking slew of issues. And I'm wondering kind of two parts. Number one, what can be done to support the women there? And if you think that women are underrepresented right now in some of the decision-making space when it comes to de-escalation, conflict prevention, mitigation, and other ways to potentially achieve peace.
I would like to start with the role of Ukrainian women in this war, which Russia started against Ukraine 10 years ago. And I can't define this role just in some concrete areas, because I know a huge amount of fantastic women in different fields of society. Ukrainian women joined armed forces. Ukrainian women document war crimes. Ukrainian women take important political decisions. Ukrainian women coordinate huge civil initiatives. Women are in the far front of this battle for freedom and for democracy, because bravery has no gender. And this gender aspect of this war is clearly indicated what this war is about. Because the war has not just military, but also value dimension. And in this regard, this is not just a war between two states, Russia and Ukraine. This is a war between two systems, authoritarianism and democracy.
Yes.
And in democracy, women can play and perform any role she wants in family and in society. But in Russia, as in other autocrats regimes, women can perform only a assigned role for her in family and society. And this is a basis for the authoritarian regime, because how people treat each other in society, it always reflects a society idea how government behavior itself towards its own people. And in this way, a private become political. And that is why in Norway, men and women have equal rights. In Afghanistan, women are prohibited to study in universities. In Russia, even domestic violence is decriminalized, because once again, it's always just a projection what government does towards its own people. And that is why in this war with Russia, which Russia started against my country 10 years ago, we Ukrainian women are fighting for our daughters. We want our daughters will never face a situation that they have to prove to someone that they are also a human beings. And I totally believe that we have to increase the voice of women, not just in peace-building dialogue, but in peace-building decision-making. Because it's very easy to speak about politics, but it's very hard to speak about people. And women can do it. In the sharp geopolitical debates towards Russian aggression against Ukraine, I am, as a human rights lawyer, always see how we lose this human dimension. Let me show it on one example. There is some part of voices, even in United States of America, that let's give up a part of Ukrainian territories in order to satisfy Russia's imperialist appetites. This is wrong thinking, because let me remind you that when the war started in 2014 and Russia occupied Crimea and eastern part of Ukraine, Ukraine has a zero chance to return these territories, but Russia didn't stop. Russia uses these 8 years just to regroup, just to prepare the economy for the next wave of sanctions, and to plan attack and to start large-scale war. So it's a wrong decision, but it's also a moral decision, because we have to speak not just about territories. We have to speak about people who live there. And I'm a human rights lawyer who have been documenting war crimes for 10 years. I know that people who live there live in gray zone. They have no tools how to defend their rights, their freedom, their property, their lives, their children, their beloved ones. I know that Russian occupation is not just changing one state flag to another. Russian occupation means torture, rape, enforced disappearances, denial of your identity, forcible adoption of your own children, filtration camps, and mass graves. So we need to bring honesty to this conversation, this human dimension. Let's speak honestly. Why we can't leave people alone for torture and death. We have no moral rights to do it.
Do you have a sense then, I mean, as far as the women's role right now in the peace process or negotiations in Ukraine, what kind of role are women playing? Do they need to play a bigger role?
We have to play a bigger role. We have to play a role which belongs to us.
Do you have a sense why leaders haven't? Why there aren't more women at the table? Is this a patriarchy thing? Is this a more women need to stand up thing? Where's the balance here?
I think that the roots in our history. What do I mean? We was a part of Soviet Union for a long, long time struggling for our independence. And we restore our independence as a country when Soviet Union collapsed. But the truth is that only 10 years ago, we, people in Ukraine, got a chance for democratic transition. And this chance wasn't granted for us. Millions of people stood up their voice against pro-Russian, authoritarian, corrupt government during the Revolution of Dignity. And they were severely persecuted. I know what I'm talking about because I was coordinator of civil initiative Euromaidan SOS at that time. And each day, hundreds and hundreds of people who were beaten, arrested, tortured, accused in fabricated criminal cases go through our care. So when authoritarian regime collapsed, we got this chance for democratic transition. And in order to stop us on this way, Russia invaded. Russia occupied Crimea, part of eastern regions of Ukraine, and 2 years ago extended this war to the large-scale invasion. Because Putin is not afraid of NATO. As every dictator, Putin is afraid of the idea of freedom, which came closer to Russian borders. And why I'm talking about this context, just to you to understand the reality, that we have just 10 years to build sustainable democratic institutions. That we are on the right track, but we have to do it during the large-scale war. And this is a huge challenge. And that's why we're not ideal democracy, but we're on the right track. We see our ambitious goal, and we keep fighting.
Yeah. Certainly there's, yes. Certainly, Ukraine is currently one of the spots where a lot of people are paying attention. I wanted to open up the conversation again, maybe go back a little bit to what we were talking about as far as the UN and ask, because the UN held its third rounds of negotiations with Afghanistan. They included representatives from more than 25 countries and the Taliban, but at the Taliban's request, Afghan women were excluded from the negotiations. And so maybe we can sort of tie this into the wider topics we're talking about. Is that acceptable, and how should the UN have handled that request?
Can I just jump into this UN thing? So when Tawako was talking about the reform of the UN, it's a very interesting conversation that has happened. Last December, we were in Japan together, and Ban Ki-moon was at that event, and he talked about the reform of the UN. I think I remember being one of the few individuals who made a presentation at the Security Council years ago and called for them to dismantle the P5. The reason the P5 needs to be dismantled is because when the UN was founded, many countries were still under colonial rule.
Yeah.
A lot of countries did not have independence. And some of the countries that are now very powerful countries in the world were not taking decisions by themselves. And you can't have 5 people decide what peace will happen. But over the last few years, I've also sat and did my own analysis of the UN. The UN is as strong as its member states. I will repeat, the UN is as strong as its member states. When the UN was founded years ago, Shireen is having a conversation. When the UN was founded years ago, the leaders of the world were thinking about our collective humanity. Today, from this country to Russia to every other place in the world, they are thinking about their individual democracy or the likeness of democracy. Not many countries are thinking about the world as the leaders who started the UN were thinking. So if we're talking about UN, we can spend all of our time here talking about the UN, the UN, the UN. And if the global leaders do not come back to that space of saying, we are as strong as Africa, we are as strong as this other place, we are as strong as that other place, we will never get to where we need to get to. With this whole Ukraine situation, sometimes I feel so sad for the poor people. We went to Lviv, walked around, interacted with women. But when you see leaders of other countries try to play politics with, we can't do this. If they wanted to end that war in Ukraine, it would have ended the moment it started. But because many nations of the world are determined to continue to play politics because of their interests and not the interests of our collective humanity. And I think that's where all of us need to start our advocacy, whether it's the Palestine, whether it's Israel, whether it's Ukraine, Yemen, Syria, wherever. We need to begin to advocate that the world's attention go back to the moment where our leaders were thinking about where all of us stand.
I have to disagree.
Disagree and agree.
Okay.
Well,
that's the essence of our conversation, so I'm happy that you are disagreeing.
Shush. I love her. Shut up.
I pray for you.
That's great. It won't work. For the past few years, I've been part of a project to draft a new charter of the UN, the second charter of the UN. And I don't believe that when the countries came together for the first version, that they were thinking about humanity. You think Stalin was thinking about humanity? Come on.
It worked for a while.
It did not. As soon as the words were on paper, they didn't do what they had committed to doing. One of the big humanitarian issues they were supposed to cover was global disarmament and taking the money that was spent on weapons to provide for the needs of humanity. Never, ever happened.
Yes.
Never. The UN, I agree with you totally on one point. It is, come on, I like to mess with you. They are only as strong as the members. And as you say, and everybody says, the veto power of the permanent 5 is, I think it's totally disgusting. Like Russia can veto anything said about its invasion of Ukraine because it's a member of the P5. I don't think the second version of it will get very far because who want people, men in power do not want to give up their power. And this version is quite different. And, the P5, I can't see them. I mean, I'd like to be in the room if they were negotiating with Russia and the U.S. about giving up their veto power.
Interesting.
It'd be like a.
And so you're looking to try and see if you can come up with sort of a improved version.
Well, and we can watch right now because the Summit of the Future is taking place, right?
Summit of the Future.
And people were calling it already a worthless document. Because those in power do not want to give up power.
Sure, which sounds a lot like the P5 problem.
P5 problem.
I believe, Shireen, you wanted to jump into the conversation as well. And I will also take this moment to note that I know that you guys have a tight schedule today. You're doing a lot of important work. We only have 6 minutes left together. So just a heads up that that's where we're at. Shireen?
شما صحبت از افغانستان کردید که چون زنی از افغانستان اینجا نیست من میخواستم از طرف زنان افغان اعتراضشون رو بیان بکنم که چه بر سرشون میاد.
So we brought the name of Afghanistan and the women of Afghanistan, but since we don't have any women from Afghanistan present in this meeting, I want to talk about the women of Afghanistan and what they're suffering.
3 ساله که طالبان افغانستان رو مجددا اشغال کرده با کمک و کشورهای دنیا چشمشون رو بستن روی افغانستان و فکر میکنن که اگر مثلا سفیر نفرستن به افغانستان کافیه اما این کافی نیست.
It's been 3 years that the Taliban have reoccupied Afghanistan. Many countries in the world think that the only way to fight them is not to send ambassadors to Afghanistan, but that's not enough.
زنان افغان فقط از حق تحصیل از دبیرستان به بالا رو محروم نشدن بلکه حتی نمیتونن از خونهشون بیرون بیان مگر اینکه همراه با یک مرد باشن. صورتشون رو باید بپوشونن، صداشون رو نبایستی یک مرد غریبه بشنوه. اینها یعنی رفتاری که با زنان افغان میکنن بسیار شدیدتر و تبعیض‌آمیزتر از رفتاری است که در آفریقای جنوبی با رنگین پوستان میکردن.
So the women in Afghanistan not only lost their right to university education, now they cannot even appear in public without being totally covered or accompanied by a man. No man can hear their voices. They have lost all of their rights. The behavior of the government of Afghanistan towards the women is worse than what was going on in South Africa against people of color.
و تمام این جنایات به خاطر ادامه داره برای اینکه چین و روسیه با طالبان کار میکنن و نفعشون درون موقعیت سوق‌الجیشی افغانستان طوری است که منافع اونها رو تامین میکنه.
And unfortunately, China and Russia are supporting the Taliban and working with the Taliban because their geopolitical rights are in the same line because of where Afghanistan is located, which is close to those two countries.
اما میبینیم که زنان افغان از پا ننشستن و با وجود اینکه دستگیر میشن، زندان میرن، کشته میشن، ولیکن هر روزه در داخل افغانستان مبارزه میشه.
But what we can see is that the women of Afghanistan have not stopped demonstrating against the government. They're fighting against the government, although they're being killed, they're being injured, they're being persecuted, but they still continue their work.
اگر حق وتو در شورای امنیت فقط با 5 کشور بزرگ نبود، مسلماً طالبان رو به عنوان جنایت علیه بشریت تا الان میشد ببریم دادگاه محاکمش رو بکنیم، ولی کن میدونیم که چین و روسیه مخالف هستن.
Had it not been for the veto rights of the 5 at the United Nations, we could have brought the Taliban to the International Criminal Court and tried them for the international criminal crimes that they are committing.
و الان اینجا صحبت از اصلاح سازمان ملل و گرفتن حق وتو از 5 کشوره. ولی که من باید بگم که مشکل از یه جای دیگری است.
So now we were talking a few minutes ago about the veto right of the 5 big countries, but I want to say that the issue is somewhere else.
ساختار سازمان ملل از سنگ اولش اشتباه بوده، برای اینکه سازمان ملل نیست اینجا، سازمان دوله، اصلا جایی برای مردم در تصمیم گیری های اصلی سازمان باقی نمونده، فقط دولت ها میتونن حرف بزنن.
But I think that the first stone or brick was misplaced when the UN was founded. The reason is that this is called the United Nations, but the nations have no voice in there. This is actually United States, United countries.
و تا زمانی که ملت ها در سازمان ملل صدا نداشته باشن و صداشون شنیده نشه، هیچ اصلاحی صورت نمیگیره، هیچ منشوری هم تصویر نمیشه.
And until the day that nations, what I mean is citizens of nations, people don't have a right to speak at the United Nations and don't have representation in the United Nations, nothing is going to happen.
و همینطوری که ما میبینیم دنیا روز به روز بیشتر داره به جنگ و حتی جنگ جهانی سوم نزدیکتر میشه.
And unfortunately we see that wars are becoming more frequent in the world and we may be getting closer to the third world war.
تو این هر کشوری هر کاری که دلش بخواد میکنه و به هیچ شیوهی هم نمیشه دولت ها رو پاسخگو کرد. شما فقط کافیه نگاه کنید به وضعیت ونزوئلا.
So countries do what they want and no one can stop them. The best example would be Venezuela.
نگاه کنید به ایران که هم در اوکراین اسلحه میده و همین که در یمن الان دوستم صحبت کرد که چطور دخالت میکنه.
Also look at Iran. Look at the arms that they're providing that are being used against the Ukrainians. And right now my colleague spoke about how Iran is meddling in the Yemeni affairs.
کدام سازمان قرار جلوی این دولت‌های زورگو رو بگیره؟
So which organization can stop these governments?
سازمان ملل فراموش کنید. اون سازمان دولت هاست. ما سازمان ملت ها میخوایم.
So the United Nations is not an organization of nations, but an organization of countries.
You know what? I feel our conversation in some ways has only just begun. There's been, I mean, I feel like we've covered so much and yet there's still so much left to discuss. Unfortunately, that has been an entire hour and I do want to be respectful of the time. I know you folks have a lot, sorry, I wanted to double check, but I know you guys have very busy schedules today. We very deeply appreciate your time. Before we wrap up the discussion, I just do want to take a moment to thank the folks who made today's events possible, our headliners, co-team leaders, Donna Lanwije, Lori Russo, Jed Judson, thank you so much, as well as the staff who assisted today, our amazing serving staff, plus Frank Maizano and Lori Agrulas. They were very key in organizing today's event, as well as the club's program manager, Cecily Scott Martin, and our executive director, Didier Soji. And we're just so grateful, I think, of having the privilege of chatting with so many strong, intelligent women who are really doing the work that we need to do. I hope at some point in the near future we can invite you back and we can have perhaps a more hopeful update about the role that women are playing.
Yeah, we're still killing hopeful, so democracy one day will win and freedom will win. So
Thank you guys so much. And we do have the National Press Club mugs. We give them to all of our guests, be them Hollywood stars like Brooke Shields, civil rights leaders, heads of state, and now I get to brag to everyone that we gave them to Nobel Peace Prize laureates. So thank you guys all so much for being here today. Another round of applause, please, for our fantastic guests. Thank you so much.